Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences.
Get on with it.
So in today's quick draw review, I am taking a look at the War of the Ring, the card game, although mostly from a 4-player perspective. I have played the 2 and 3 player modes once each, and personally, I'm in agreement with a lot of people about this game that this is really a 4-player game. So what exactly am I talking about here? Well, War of the Ring, the card game, is a spin-off card game from the War of the Ring board game, the big giant one. Used to have it downstairs, played it once or twice, and then sold it. Not because the game's bad, I think the game's actually pretty solid. It's just huge, 2-player only, takes about 4 hours to play, and requires a lot of rules checking. It's like, yeah. Bit too much for what I needed, but I respect the game and I did enjoy my time with it. This is not War of the Ring condensed down, okay? War of the Ring and War of the Ring the card game are very different games, okay? This is like not going to suddenly replace War of the Ring. They're very different experiences. But War of the Ring, very simply, ignore the reference aids, I printed a few off from the Esoteric Order of Gamers, but War of the Ring, the card game, basically has 2v2 setup where there are 2 shadow players and two free people players, essentially, the good guys. Each of the players has their own little deck of cards, and their cards will correspond to different factions in the Lord of the Rings world. So this is essentially playing through the main 3 movies. And so one player is controlling the hobbits and the Rohan people, but then another good player is controlling the elves and the Dunedain. Was it Dunedain? I can't remember the pronunciation. But the shadow player will have one player controlling pretty much Mordor and all the orcs, whereas the other one is controlling monsters and Isengard and little side factions like that. But the idea is that as the game progresses, players will be essentially fighting over these paths. They represent locations from the Lord of the Rings story. So, getting to Surf Ungol, Shelob's Lair, trying to find the Doors of Durin, the Council of Elrond, into the Prancing Pony, Buckleberry Ferry, all that stuff. And so there are 9 paths that you will fight over, of which there are variants for each level. But on top of that, there are also battlegrounds that came from the films, like, of course, Helm's Deep and Orthanc and Moria and Rivendell and Lorien, stuff like that, which players are also fighting over. But the idea is that during your turn, you essentially have a hand of cards and you will play them either to battlegrounds, to the path, or in reserve in front of you. And they have different abilities and effects based on where you play them, but the cards themselves have restrictions of where they can go based on what you're doing. So for example, if I take the Free People's Hobbit deck here, I can find, is this the Hobbit deck? Nope, this is the Dunedain and Elf deck. But I could find Elrond the Elf. Okay, I could play it. He's a powerful character. I bet it will be amazing. Well, yeah, when he's in reserve, I get to carry more cards over to the next round. Sweet. Oh, wait, I can only play him to the path number 3. I can't play him to any of the other 8 paths. It's like, so he's quite restricted. And obviously he needs to lead elves in order to be more powerful himself. Okay. And Galadriel, similar deal. Quite a powerful character, but can't go to many places. And so the idea is that it's a tactical 2v2 game where you're jostling over these positions and locations for victory points, but you also have to think about the long game, because this is designed by Ian Brody, and if you know that name, you will recognize it from Ares Games' other line, the Quartermaster General lines. Ian Brody basically has designed these games where the Attrition system is used. This is where you basically have a deck of cards that you use for the entire game, and as you go through the game, some cards will cycle back, but others will go away forever and you'll never get them back. But you never get to have a new deck of cards, and it's very difficult to keep your resources flowing. So the idea is that if you commit too early, you overcommit, you run the risk of getting to the late game and suddenly your plans fall apart because you run out of those resources. Works great in the Quartermaster General games, and here it also works great. I think this card system is brilliant because you have not that many cards in your deck, and when you are deciding whether you're going to cycle a card, play a card, because every time you play a card you have to cycle another one, which means you're not going to see it for quite a few rounds, but then there are times where you might have to literally eliminate a card from the game, and it's like, well, do I really want to eliminate that card? I mean, that'd be quite cool later. And on top of that, you've got the famous characters. Like, for example, if I'm playing the other Free People deck here, well, I could go and, could I play, Frodo Baggins? Could I play, some of the other hobbits, Sam Gamgee and that? But better still, Gandalf.
You shall not
I can play Gandalf the Grey or I can play Gandalf the White. But if I play the White, then it replaces the Grey. And when do I play Gandalf? You know, do I play him now and commit him to something early just to get a couple of VPs? Or do I hold him back in reserve until he's needed? But then, you know, if I need to play something else right now, do I then cycle Gandalf and hope that he comes back later for those, like, more challenging paths later in the game?
Fly, you fools!
There's a lot of cool decisions you have to make as an individual for what cards that you're going to use. But even with your partner, 2v2, it's not closed communications. What you discuss, the other players can hear as well. And there's a lot of deals where, you know, based on the balance of these decks, where some factions are better at certain things than others. Like, for example, the Dunedain and the Elves do pretty well on the Battleground front. Not as well on the Paths, though. The Paths of the Fellowship, these characters weren't there for most of the films, or most of the story. So these ones are more akin to Battlegrounds, whereas these ones are more akin to the Path. So you got to work with your partner to think, well, I can bolster you here, but you're going to need to help me over here because there's no way I can take this off my Isengard opponent here. And the Battlegrounds, you know, have different restrictions on which factions can go there, based again on the lore. Like, I can't send elves to Harad. You know, elves never set foot there. And that's one thing that does come through from that perspective is the theme very strong. Very, very strong. This has got Lord of the Rings lore steeped in how these cards are designed and how these paths and locations are designed, particularly with regards to what characters and what factions could go where at any time. You know, it's alright saying I've got Galadriel, but then Galadriel literally appears in Lorien, I think, in the movie, and that's it. You know, if I'm battling over Helm's Deep, Galadriel does not suddenly appear at Helm's Deep during the movies. But then there's other, you know, like the Hobbits can appear at most of the paths. You know, they're fine, they're pretty flexible. But then there are other characters, like, for example, let's go find one. Faramir. You know, Faramir can go on path 7 and 8. So quite late on in the sequence. You know, Faramir was not at Buckleberry Ferry. It was not at the Prancing Pony. It was not at the Council of Elrond. You know, it wasn't there during those parts in the movie, so therefore he can't go to those locations. The theme is being taken seriously here, and I think it works brilliantly for that respect.
Salted pork.
Now, I did briefly mention about the 1v1 and the 2-player and the 3-player mode. You essentially play this in what's called the trilogy scenario for 4 players. This is the real way that you should do it. But you can also play it in a 2-player duel, a 3-player duel, and a 2 to 3-player trilogy scenario. But when you play with these methods, you essentially have players using multiple decks, or one person using 2 decks and one person using others. And the balance goes a little bit weird there, and you know, a lot of people who play this game think that that doesn't really work at those counts. I don't think the game collapses at those counts. I think it's playable at 2 and 3, but I'd rather not. I think a bit like Cerebria, the Inside World, the big Mind Clash game I talk about, that's a 2v2 game. But in that game, you could play it with less players. But unless you know the game really well, I think it works better in the 2v2 format, and this is just another classic example of that, which does make it a little bit restrictive, because I think this game is very enjoyable, really cool, but you are really cut into playing this in a 2v2 group setting. And if you don't have that setting that could get this to the game table regularly, I think you're going to suffer with your enjoyment of this. Not just because of that format, but because of the way this game is played. It doesn't favour new players. Not because of the amount of rules. There's not actually a huge amount of rules in the game. I mean, the book goes into pretty good detail as to how things work. I didn't really have too much trouble learning the game from the rulebook, and there are some like online media that you can check out as well. But the main problem is that you kind of want to know how your deck works. It's alright giving me the Elf and Dunedain deck, but if it's the first time I'm using it, I don't know that my characters can't go to certain locations. I don't know that I suck at the Fellowship paths, but I'm great at these areas. I don't know which path Battlegrounds come out of the deck that elves can go to. So a bit of knowledge of the game for people who play this more often is going to benefit you a lot. And if you play, I mean, if 2 new players play against 2 people who know what they're doing, they're going to get creamed, like, hands down. So you've got to, like, spread out the people who are, like, familiar with the game and not. But then if you have 3 familiar players and then 1 new player, that team with the new player on it, again, is at a pretty big disadvantage.
Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
the more I play this, if I'm teaching new people all the time, as I play this more and more, I'm at an advantage compared to the ones who haven't played it before. And that does hurt it. But I can't fault the game too much for it. That's just the fact that it's quite a niche market, a niche setting for this. And I still enjoy playing this with people who haven't played the game before, but we go into it knowing that there is a bit of pre-knowledge that would benefit you. And for those who have played the game before, like if I go to a convention and play it with people who do know what they're doing, it is one of the more fun experiences I can have with a card game of this nature. It really is good fun. And of course on the horizon, we have the Shadow and Light expansion, or whatever it was called, that I have play tested. I play tested it with one of the employees at Ares Games at the Games Expo, which includes a co-op, 2-player, and solo method of playing the game. And I can tell you right now, check out my podcast for the UK Games Expo for more detail, but as a heads up, that solo expansion is done very well. It's not too difficult to pilot, and it means that I will be able to get even more enjoyment out of this game when that releases, either by cooperation, which means that if you have a new player, it doesn't hinder you as much, but then also just to play this solo. I can't wait for that expansion. I think it's going to really elevate this for me, but it's already pretty high on the elevation, frankly. This is a great, fun game. It's niche. I don't know how often I'm going to get it to the table outside of the upcoming solo mode, but when I do get this to the table as a 2v2 experience, it is great fun. A bit long, certainly a bit long. This is going to set you back a good 2 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours potentially on your first game. It's not a short game, unless somebody meets the victory condition early, which is, I think they lead by 10 or more victory points at the end of a round. I've yet to see that happen, honestly. We've always finished at path 9, and depending on how quickly you burn through certain paths, because there are certain abilities that let you kind of fast forward the timer, you might be spending a little bit less time in the game or a bit more time in the game, depending. But I still think it's a solid, fun experience. Even though these decks look small, there's still a decent amount of variety in them, and because you're so precious over them. There's a lot of games lately like Earth and Isle of Trains where when I taught the game, I tell people don't get attached to your cards because you're going to discard most of them anyway. I mean, you play Earth, you could end up with 12 cards at the start of the game, and then you compost 5 of them, and then you go, I'll plant this and this, and then I'll just compost these 3, and then these aren't pretty good. Oh, well, I'll draw another 10 more. And so the cards are just a currency. Well, here, they are valuable. You do not teach the game by saying don't get attached to your cards, because you can't help but get attached to these cards.
Cast it into the fire! Destroy it! No.
It's what makes the decisions you make, tense and interesting, and you don't really see the long-term ramifications of those decisions until you get further in the game. And then you get to path 9, for example, and my opponents in my last game, they had a ton of like the Witch King and all these nasties out in front of them. Well, they were forced to commit them into path 8 to do stuff to me and deal out a decent amount of corruption. But then when it got to path 9, they couldn't get them back out of the deck quick enough, and so we could steamroll them into path 9, and it's that attrition system that really elevates this game. I thought it was just going to be some cheesy little spin-off, really, when it said War of the Ring, the card game, because anytime you put the words the card game on something, I'm always like, you thought long and hard about that title, didn't you? Oh, well, come on, let's see if it's any good. Well, this one is very good. I think it's an excellent game. I want to play it more. I probably won't get to play it more, which is such a shame, and I do have to knock it a little bit for the fact that it is quite niche and pretty much only works at 1 player count mainly, but I could see this elevating when the next expansion comes out to make it solo, and when it does, I think this will be one of the more fun solo games I play. I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10, a seal of distinction. I think that if you have that setup, a regular 2v2 group, or just a club of, club of members, club of board game players who want to try this game out, and you can easily get a 4-player game together, I think you're going to have a blast with this game, regardless of whether you've even touched the big War of the Ring game, because it really doesn't matter. If I'd never played it, I would still enjoy this, because the two just aren't similar really in any way other than the fact that it uses the Lord of the Rings lore and license. But if you are not able to get that 4-player setup and you're kind of stuck with 2 or 3 of you, might be one to skip, or at least maybe try it when the expansion comes out to let 2-player co-op and the solo mode take over, because then it might be something you want to do. And I think there's more expansions planned down the line with like extra factions and the ability to put it up to 6 players. I'm not exactly keen on this being a 6-player game, guys, just saying. But more cards, more factions, more interesting abilities could be pretty cool. But for now, just give me that solo expansion, and this could be as good as a 10. Who knows? Probably might stay as a 9. Oh well, we'll have to see when I get a copy of that expansion and hopefully review it for Beyond the Base Game. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when the review goes live. Don't forget to check out more content I have done on the channel, including all the reviews and top 10s in recent months. But of course, let me know your comments down below. Do you love the War of the Ring, the board game, the big one? Do you love this card game? Do you play it in the 2 or 3 player mode and still get a lot of enjoyment out of it? In which case, let us know your experiences and your thoughts, because I've mainly played this 2v2. This review is pretty much based on the fact that it is a 2v2 game as opposed to 2 and 3 player, so your experiences would be useful for other consumers on this channel, and we thank you for it. But of course, remember, regardless of whether you're a stupid fat hobbit or not, it's still only a game. Bye for now.